Hi, Kush here. So today we'll be learning about analog. It's a subtractive synth which comes with Ableton, any suite version. So as the name suggests, analog, right? But it's not exactly an emulation of any particular analog synth, but it has the best features of each of them. So for example, it will have a filter emulation of one of those, a sound of an oscillator of one of those. We'll be completely going through it. So let's begin. So as soon as you open analog, you will probably get this view or maybe, yeah, this view. So how it is structured is it has a display of shell, right? This shell plus a display view, right? So it has these different modules. It has two oscillators, two filters, two amplifiers, two LFOs, and also noise generator. And all of these modules, when clicked, are displayed in the display view, right? And this gives you more parameters to control. So the shell only has the most important controls, and then you can get into the details and the nitty-gritties with the display view. Let's begin. So although it looks like it only has two oscillators, but then we learn later that it has actually four oscillators and a noise generator. So coming to the first oscillator. So this oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, these toggle buttons, these are just on off buttons, and the volume control obviously, so they are by default set to 0. Then we have this F1 slash F2. So what this basically is deciding that in which filter will your oscillator go through, right? So currently it shows F1, so it's a scrollable control. So if we click and drag up, sorry, if we click and drag down, you can see this, the value is changing. So the first value is the value for the amount going to the filter 1, right? And the second value is the amount going to filter 2. So if we go all the way down, the right value keeps increasing, which means that we're slowly approaching completely to filter 2. So this is a feature like which you have in analog, that you can send the signal of both the oscillators parallelly to both the filters, right, for different sound structures and creative purposes. So for now I'll keep it to F1, right, and I'll turn off the second oscillator. Let's see the first oscillator. Then we have our wave shape. It has a sine, saw wave, pulse wave or square wave, you can say, and we have a noise, which in this case is a white noise. Then we have an octave control. So this goes from +3 to -3 octaves. So you can shift in octaves. Then we have semitone control. This is again +12 semitones, which is an octave, and -12 semitones. And then we also have a detune control. So this is for fine tuning your sound, right? Sometimes what we need is we just need a slightly detuned sound in both the oscillators. So this is very helpful there. So now let's come to the display view of the oscillator. So as soon as you open the display view, you see this weird line. So this is an envelope, a pitch envelope. So if I increase the value, so you can hear that pitch dragging down from the very, like, about, I think it's 48 semitones, I don't know. So, and this, then we have the time. So this amount, the y-axis, decides how much of pitch envelope you want, right? So I think it's 48 semitones from what I think. It goes bottom to, right, that laser effect, and this decides the time, so it can even be longer if we need that for some reason, like maybe we're making any riser or down lifters, so this may be helpful. And it can go pretty quick, like to give you that attack and punch in the sound, right? So for now I'll set it to 0, the default values. So now what we have next is pitch mod, right? Pitch mod, and you can see this control key 100%. So what this means is that how much the pitch is affected by the key that you play, right? So this is very obvious, and it is by default set to 100% because we want every key of a keyboard to change the pitch, right? So if we are playing a C, we want a C, right? But if we just reduce this value, and I'll do it to 0% for you to understand. So now any key that I play, okay, let me show you. I'll just create a MIDI clip. So any key that I play, it will always have a same sound because we have set it to 0%, but then I'll set it again to 100%, right? Oh, sorry, that's 200. I'll set it to 100. And now it's our normal keyboard tuned to 440 hertz. So it's C2, yeah. Right. So this is a normal. Now there's also LFO1. So how analog is hardwired is that the pitch mod section of oscillator 1 is hardwired to LFO1. And if you check the same in oscillator 2, it's hardwired to oscillator 2. So this is something we cannot change, but then it has its use. So this is grayed out, right? You can't really hear any difference even if you change the values, because right now the LFO is turned off. So we'll just turn the LFO on, and then we can see that this turns blue. Now this means that the control is active. So now if I change the value, like for example, I'll set it to 0.5. So right now what's happening is that the frequency of LFO1, that is for example 0.9 hertz right now. So this is affecting the pitch of oscillator 1. So even if we increase this value, the frequency of LFO1, we can get all sorts of crazy effects. So what is LFO? LFO basically is a low frequency oscillator. So right now, as we saw, it's a controllable frequency because it's a very low frequency, and that's why we can even hear the difference in changing the pitch of oscillator 1. So the next control is pulse width, right? And this is also grayed out, like, so it's inactive. Why is it inactive? Because it's only usable for the pulse wave or the square wave. So now pulse width is basically controlling the width between the first part and the second part of a square wave. So I'll just explain from here. This is a square wave, right? So it has equal divisions right now. So if we decrease the pulse width, it will have uneven distribution. So you'll hear the difference. See, it's a very thin sound, right? And if I change the value, you can have all different types of pulse wave sounds. So now this also is controllable by LFO1. Right now, as we just saw the pitch mod, the pitch of the oscillator is controllable. Now the pulse width of the pulse wave from oscillator 1 is controllable by LFO1. So I'll just increase this value. And you can hear that changing pulse width. So now the next is the sub or sync oscillator. So earlier when I said that it looks like it analog only has 2 oscillators, but it actually has 4. This is what I meant, because here we have an option to add a sub oscillator in both oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 separate. So what this is, okay, I'll play just the raw sound. And if I increase this level, this is basically the volume of the sub oscillator. So if I increase the volume, you can hear another oscillator, right? So this is a really good feature when you need some of the lows and not completely bold sound of the low end, but then you need some support, right? This is very helpful. Now if just set this to sync. Now what sync is basically, it's not exactly, it will not follow the pitch of what you're playing, but this ratio control decides the pitch of the sync oscillator. So I'll play this. So what this is doing is not exactly what you heard in the sub oscillator, right? So it's not a sound playing with the original oscillator, but it's actually affecting the sound of our current sound. And this is the pitch in which it affects. So with this, we are done with all the controls of the oscillator section. So now let's come to the next module, which is filter. So right from the above, you can see the filter one toggle button, that is on and off. Then we have an option to select the filter types. We have 2 low passes, band pass, notch, high pass, and formant. Now what formant is basically replicating the sound of a human voice, right? We'll look into it later. So for right now, I'll choose the low pass 24, and then we can see this 2F2. Okay. For example, we had this oscillator 1K niche, we had F1/F2. It's a similar control. So what this is telling is that we can send the sound from any sound which is coming to filter 1, we can also send it to filter 2, right? So currently we have oscillator 1 only going to filter 1, and if we do this to for about like 50/50 approximately, so we'll have the sound going to filter 1 and filter 2 simultaneously. But then with this control, if we send this 100% to filter 2, what this means is that the sound will first go to filter 1 and then it will go to filter 2, right? So it's a series connection. Earlier it was a parallel connection, now it's a series. So then the basic control, we have a frequency control, a resonance control, and now we'll come to the display part of the filter section. Now, both the filters have their separate envelope, right? And we can have the sound of both the filters separate. So envelope basically is, so the filter envelope basically decides how the filter moves. So for example, I'll set this to about 1K, right? And you can hear this punch in the sound, like that click. This is because of the envelope. If I set it all the way up, so now it's more of a plucky sound, right? So we have all the controls. We can directly control from these boxes, these square boxes, or we can change the values from here, the attack, decay, sustain. So next we have this attack to velocity control. So what this means is the harder you hit the key, the faster the attack will be. So right now it's not affecting anything. I'll increase the volume just a minute. Better. So as we can see here, if I increase this value, and I'll even increase the attack for you to hear the difference. So right now I'm hitting the key very softly. So the filter is taking complete time to open up. But then if I hit it harder, so right now we just saw that the attack of the filter was being affected by the velocity. I'll put it to 0 right now. And we have the next control, envelope to velocity. Now what this decides is, okay, from this 576 hertz, how much the filter is going to open up from this value, the maximum value, right? So right now, if I play the key, so it was clear enough, right? You could hear the filter opening up more as I increase the value. So that's what basically it is. Now we have this sustain time, S time. To demonstrate this, I'll just increase the sustain. It's there. Now if I decrease this value, even after reaching the sustain value, it's closing off gradually in this amount of time. So that's what this control is for. So now we have the release control, right? What is release control? So okay, I'll just to demonstrate this, I'll just put this sustain all the way up, right? So if I just reduce this value to like fairly low amount, so as soon as I leave the key, the filter immediately closes off to the frequency which we have set for, which here is 576 hertz. But now if I increase this value, so even if I leave the key, it takes about this time to gradually reach to the frequency that we have set here, right? And it does not just shuts like a door immediately. So this is how you can shape your sound from filters. So for further purposes, I'll set it to something like this. Right. So now we have this loop control, right? And again, analog gives you immense creative possibilities with this one because you can get some pretty unique sounds. Let's start. So it has three modes. By default, it's set to off. Let's see the first mode. AD repeat, right? This is attack, decay, repeat. So what will happen is once I'll play the chord. So what you right now listening is the attack and the decay phases are repeating themselves until the key is pressed, right? So these will keep repeating till I don't release the key, right? Now we have the next ADR repeat, attack, decay, and release, repeat. So in the first one, we had only this part and this part, attack and decay repeating. Now we have the attack, decay, and release, right? You'll hear this. Attack, decay, release, attack, decay, release, right? It's repeating. Now we have the third mode. It's ADSAR. So it's not a looping one, but then what happens here is it will play the whole sound, and once I release the key, it will, okay, it's an after key effect, right? So as soon as I release the keys, it will play the attack and release again, right? Okay, I'll play the keys. So it's not a looping mode, but then it's an additive feature to this, right? Okay, now let's come here. We have a frequency modulation, right? So like we had this pitch mod and pulse width, and we have here here we have the frequency modulation. Again, you can control the frequency of this filter with LFO 1 and also the key, right? So what key here gives us is that the higher key we play, the higher the frequency opens up, and the lower we go, okay, this can also be negative values, right? So we can have the opposite effect too. Now let's see what the LFO 1 does. Then we have key. So now I'll just shut this one. Okay, now if I'm playing this low note and this high note, the values are the same. But if I put this to 1, oh sorry, the 4, this low key has a lower opening cutoff frequency, while this higher key has a higher cutoff frequency. So this can be used to make your sounds sounding more natural and not just digital, right? So these are the small things which will make your sound feel natural. Now we have the envelope control. So what this does is shifts the entire frequency band that we are affecting from the filter. So I'll set it to 0 first. I'll open up gradually. So you see that it affects everything, right? From this frequency that we have set here to how much it's opening up, basically shifting the whole thing up and down, right? It can go from plus 16 to negative 16. So now we have these last few controls left in the filter section. And so the first one is a slope control, right? Linear and exponential. So what the difference is, a linear slope is basically a constant slope, right? You can see in the attack, decay, and release that it's a constant pace from which it's rising, decaying, and releasing, right? So now with the same attack, decay, and release timings, I'll put into exponential mode. So right, the shape of the slope makes a whole lot of difference, right? So this can be used for shaping the sound again. Next we have the legato mode. So what's the legato mode is, in the legato mode, each new note will not have its own slope, right? If it's turned off, each new note has its own shape. But then if we're in the legato mode and we press a second note while the first note is still completing its envelope, the second note will not start its own envelope, but it will follow the envelope of the first note, right? Right, you can hear the difference. Now we have a free mode. So what a free mode is, basically when it's turned on, it's the filter skips the sustain part, right? It will skip the sustain part and directly jump onto the release. So right now when it's turned off, if I play a note, this stays on the sustain level. Now I'll put it into free mode. So it will do the attack, decay, and then it will do the release. It will skip the sustain, right? So with this, we have completed the complete filter section except two things. Number one being this drive control. So right, this can be a very good deciding factor of how your sound is going to be. So we have six different options available. By default, it's at symmetric one. We have three symmetric distortions and three asymmetric distortions. Basically, it's not that harsh distortion. It's basically saturating the signal. So let's see, symmetric one, symmetric two. So you see there are increased harmonics, and even for that matter in asymmetric, you see that drive, the crunch. Okay, let's put that to symmetric one, which is by the default. Now the second thing and the last thing in filter section is the only one and only difference in these two filters, that is this part. So in filter one, you can send the signal to filter two by this slider, but you don't have such a control in filter two. In filter 2, you have this follow button. So what this makes is filter 2 a slave, a kind of a slave of filter 1. So every control, including all these modulations of filter 1, will directly affect the filter 2. So what you can maintain is, for example, these offsets, right? So these frequency and resonances controls. If there's an offset, for example, I have resonance at 0 and I have here resonance at 20, for example. So once I move these resonances, for example, to 50, so automatically it's not visible here, but then the resonances move to 70, which is right. We had the offset of 20, right? This was at 0 and this was at 20. And now if we move this resonance will automatically increase. Similarly for the frequency. So this completes the filter section and the display controls of it. So now we come to the amplifier section of analog. Since we have done the filter section thoroughly, this section will be very easy for us because 90% of the controls are the same, right? You can see that the same, we have attack, decay, sustain time, release, loop control. We even have the attack to velocity and envelope to velocity features. Just the difference is in filter section, it was affecting the filter frequency. Now it will affect the volume, right? Let's check the attack to velocity control. So what this does is the harder I press the key, the faster the attack will be. So right now it's set to 0, so there's no difference how hard or soft I play the key. Right, no difference. But now if I increase this to about 7 or 8, now if I press it soft, it will take the complete time to rise. But now if I press it hard, soft, hard, so you see, you hear the difference, right? If I press it softly, it will be a gradual rise. Similarly, now we have the envelope to velocity control. This is basically the harder I push the key, the higher volume there will be, right? So right now it's set to 0, so there will be no effect on the volume of velocity. Even if I press it hard or soft, there's no difference. Now if I increase this value, now you'll see the difference. If I press it softly, oh, sorry about that. So you can get pretty loud with this. Okay, so next, similarly, like we had the frequency mod and resonance mod, here we have the pan, which is here, and level mods. So basically we have a pan feature for both of the amplifiers, and it's self-explanatory, left, right, and a level, basically volume. Now, similarly, we can control this with the LFO 1 key and envelope, and that's same for the level. Now let's check out these. Okay, yeah, before that we have the same slope controls and legato and free mode for the amplifier envelope which we had in the filter section. So we finally have the LFO section. We have two LFOs, as we know, LFO 1 at the top and LFO 2 at the bottom. So the shell controls are fairly simple. We have hertz and we have in notes. So hertz is basically gradual change in the speed or the frequency of LFO, the low frequency oscillator, that is based on how many times it will oscillate in 1 second, right? So if I set it to 1, So this is exactly oscillating once a second. So to demonstrate this, I'll just put the level mod, right? So every second you have this sine wave which is bouncing up and down. If I increase this rate, right? And now we have the note. So when we set it notes, it will basically sync up to your BPM. For example, I have 118.5. I don't know for what reason, but yes. So it will be 1/4 of that, right? And we have the same for the LFO 2, right? Now we have the display mode and we have the LFO 1 at the top and 2 at the bottom. So those are the exactly same features. So I'll explain for one. So we have, I think 5 waves. Yes, we can shift from a sine wave to a triangle to a rectangle on, and we have 2 types of noises, and these are just random values and maybe a sample and hold. Yes, a sample and hold. So what you can do from in the triangle and the rectangle wave is that you can change the width. So when we change the width in a triangle wave, so what this does is converts into a sawtooth wave, right? Like a ramp up, it's going up and then it suddenly goes down, right? And just the opposite if we put it to 100%. Now retriggers the LFO each time you play a note. So right now, even if we play multiple notes, what's happening is it is following the LFO of first note. Now if we put it to retrigger, so you can separately hear the LFOs or of the different notes. If I shut this off, they are all going in the sync. Offset is basically just the this offset, right, from where you want the LFO to start. Right. Also, yeah, we have this in rectangle, the width feature. This is basically the pulse width modulation, right? We looked it up here. The pulse width modulation. This is basically a visual representation of that. So this happens when you so this completely depends on you what shape you want. For now, I'll keep it on sine. Offset is, as I said, from where the LFO starts. Now delay is basically how much time it takes for the LFO to start once you have played the note. So if I right now it's 0, so it will immediately start. Now if I put it to for about like 900 milliseconds. So after 900 milliseconds, the LFO starts. Now what attack is? Attack is basically giving you a gradual slope. That LFO starts, it does starts suddenly, right? It will start with a gradual slope. So I'll put it to about a second. So it does not suddenly hit the volume of the envelope, but it gradually gives it a shape, right? So finally we have the global controls. We have the volume, vibrato, unison, and glide. Volume is obviously the global volume, right? The whole thing. Then we have vibrato, right? Vibrato is usually we have seen this as the emulation of many analog synths. We have this some pitch modulation, right? So we can use it there. Obviously not so fast. Then we have the unison. Unison basically stacks the voices. So right now, okay, we have the unison controls here, right? We have 2 voices and 4 voice option, right? So if it's at 2, as soon as we increase this, we can hear more and more detune, right? And at 100%, it's an octave higher. can hear for the 4 voices. Now, this delay feature, okay, I'll put it to 2 voices and about this much of detune. This delay basically tells us how much time will the detune voices will take to trigger once we have the main key, right? So right now it's at 0. So all of them are starting simultaneously. But I'll put it to this about at 100 milliseconds. So now you can clearly hear the difference in the original voice and the detune voices. To make this more clear, I'll right now it's more clearly audible. Yes. So then we have the glide controls. Basically, when you glide is basically a gradual pitch rise or a pitch down to a note which is played. Fuck. Finally have the glide control. So glide is basically a gradual pitch change from one note to another. To hear this, I'll put the voices to mono, right? And if it's turned off, they're just sudden cuts. Now we put the glide mode on. Okay, now we have the global routing controls. So we have basically 4 different routing options which are given to us. The first one is this one. So in this routing, what happens is oscillator 1 goes to filter 1 and to amplifier 1. And similarly, oscillator 2 goes to filter 2 and then to amplifier 2. The second one is where both the oscillators go to both the filters, right? So oscillator 1 and 2 both are going to filter 1 and as well as filter 2. But the sounds from filter 1 are only going to amplifier 1 and the sounds of filter 2 are going to amplifier 2. Now the third mode is both the oscillators are going to filter 1 and then the sound from filter 1 is going to do amplifier 1. And the last option is when both the oscillators are going to filter 1, then this sound from filter 1 is going to filter 2 and then they're going to amplifier 2 for the final routing. We have these vibrato controls here. Okay, I'll put it to this basic routing here. So you can see the vibrato is by default as this sound, but then we have more controls to it. We have an error, so it will not be exactly the same. There will be some errors always. And then we have a delay feature, right? Like we had in the LFO, the delay. This is same for the vibrato. So delay decides how much time the vibrato will take to start once we have pressed the key. Okay, I'll put it to about 1 second. And it should be more it's taking time to start. Now we similarly have the attack. Attack is basically a ramp up. It gradually increases. And then we have this attack to MW, that is mod wheel. So this will decide how much we can control the vibrato with the mod wheel. So I'll just put it to 100%. And okay, sadly not able to see my mod wheel, but then this gives you an idea. So I'll put this amount to 0, but then we have put this at 100%. That's why we will be able to control this from our mod wheel. So now we have the global keyboard controls, and the first one is octave. So this will shift the octave of the whole synthesizer. Right, semitones again global, detune again global. Pitch bend range. Pitch bend range is basically how many semitones, right? Remember this is in semitones. So how many semitones will the pitch be affected from the pitch bend wheel on the keyboard? So right now it's set to 2. So now we have the stretch control, right? And this is basically stretching the pitch range of the whole keyboard. So to show you this, I have just put up a tuner. I've just pulled up a tuner, and by default it's at 0, so all the notes are on pitch. Now if I increase it, and just for showing you, I'm putting it to the maximum percentage. So now what will happen is the lower notes will slightly detune up to a low frequency, and the higher notes will detune to a higher frequency. So let's see. C3 is the center point, so C3 will not be affected. Now let's press C1. You can see that. Okay, C0. Similarly, let's see with C4. Right. So if for some reason you want that, we have a control here. Then we have a error control. Error is basically slightly detuning, not as the stretch. In stretch, what happened was lower notes were detuned lower and higher notes were detuned higher. Also, we have this goes to negative also, so we can squeeze the pitch bend range with this. Now in error, all the notes will be slightly randomly detuned, right? So okay, just a second. Sorry for that. There's no fixed value of detune. So last but not the least, we have the voices control. Voices is how many notes can you play at the same time. So it has 1 to 32, right? And the stacks of 2, 4, 8, 12, 16, right? And then we have the priority control. Priority is basically which note is more important when played in order, right? So we have three options: high, low, and last. By default, it is at last. So let's do it. In high, okay, I've put this MIDI clip up to explain you guys. So in high, what will happen is you will see as I play this, it will only prioritize the high notes. All the high notes will be played, right? Let's see this. So whenever a higher note is present, it will be played. But then, as you can see, these low notes were not played. Let's see it again. These were not played. Now let's put it to low. So the exact opposite happened, right? First, the lower notes were not played, and now this time the higher notes were not played. And we have the last option, right? The last. So last means is whichever note is played at the last will be played. So let's see this too. Right. So we're done with the global controls also, and now only one thing's left, and that is the glide mode. There's basically two modes in this glide. We have constant and we have proportional. So in the constant mode, no matter how much the note difference is, the glide time will remain the same. So for example, let's put C and D. And now C1 and C3. Time is same. Now I'll do the same with the proportional mode. In proportional, what happens is the longer the duration is, the longer the distance between the notes is, the longer duration it will take to glide to that note. So first we'll see from C to D. And now from C1 to C3. So if the notes are closer, the glide time is lesser, and if the notes are far apart, the glide time is higher. Now we have the noise oscillator, and it's fairly simple because it just has an on and off button, a volume control, and again we have the F1/F2 button. We can set it to F filter 1, filter 2, or we can have a parallel combination. And we have a color knob, right? So basically, okay, you hear this. So you can basically decide how bright you want the sound, and that's it for the noise generator. So with this, we are finally done with everything to know about analog. And now the next section, I'll show you some of the examples of the sounds that can be made. These are just 4 quick sounds I made. So let's hear them. So this first sound is a modern David Guetta type lead. I've taken the melody from the song Kill Me Slow by David Guetta and Morton and tried to tried to get as close as I can from just using analog and nothing else. There's analog, there's no post processing or anything, the EQ is turned off, and I've just put some reverb, right? So let's hear it. So I think this is a really, really good sound, and it's basically how you visualize the sound, and you can achieve even such good sounds from a very simple native synth from Ableton. Next one is this atmospheric ARP sound, ambient sound. This what I've done is I've just put an arpeggiator to increase the speed of the notes, and I've written a bass line with it. That sound has also been written in analog itself, and this just basic piece, I thought it off as an intro to any song, and I'll be just modulating this gate control right here. So let's hear this one too. And also, yeah, there's a reverb and delay. No post processing, nothing else. It's off. Only some reverb and delay. Let's hear it. And we have the last sound, which is a bass sound. And let's hear it. It's okay. In this one too, there's no post processing. Just I've put a chorus to get some white, but I can even turn it off. It's good enough. And there's some very, very basic reverb. We have another riff here. So although it's completely different, but then I think this melody matches with one of the Kashmir songs. So anyways, this wraps up this in-depth tutorial for analog, and all these sounds are the examples of the amazing sounds which you can even get from analog. Although it's native, people don't really, I think analog is a very uh, underrated synthesizer, but then I find myself using it quite a lot in productions with sounds like these. So that's it. That's it from my side. Thank you.